Welcome, all of you ladies and gentlemen, to the closing plenary session of what has been an insightful and very exciting annual meeting on cybersecurity here at the World Economic Forum. Again, thanks for staying to the end. It's nice to see a lot of you manage to do that. I'd like to make a special mention and give a warm welcome to Professor Klaus Schwab, who will be joining us after the panel for some closing remarks. So welcome. And I'd also just like to do a quick round of applause for the hardworking team that has made this possible today. Can we do that? Nice. Great. All right. Okay, we know, welcome, connectivity and digitalization are only set to increase, right? So largely enabled by 5G, this number blows me away. Up to 500 billion connected devices are expected to produce zettabytes. How many zeros is that? Of data by 2030. I mean, at the same time, cloud services, artificial intelligence, biometrics, blockchain, they all offer, of course, new ways to digitally secure information, but as we all know, ways to attack. So, and of course, let's not forget to mention the serious level of economic, legal, and reputational consequences as a result. In short, we know the problems. That's why we're here. Now, across the last 2 days, we've heard about leadership and about the responsibility of boards and C-suites in terms of making decisions regarding cybersecurity, and about how the public and private sectors can work together to push forward the discussions, and ultimately find solutions. So in short, the theme of this event, enabling leadership for a secure digital future. Now, these are only a couple of the topics I'd like to get into with our panelists today, but let me start by introducing them. First off, David Koh, Chief Executive, Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. Welcome, sir. Next, in the middle seat there, if you were at dinner last night and caught his keynote, then he probably needs little introduction, but Risto Siilasmaa, Chairman of F-Secure Corporation.
Even my name is securely encrypted.
I can see that. How did I do? Was that right?
Quite well, yeah.
Siilasmaa, okay. And at the end, last but not the least, of course, René Bonvanie. He is Executive Vice President, Strategic Accounts at Palo Alto Networks in the USA. So we've got US, we've got Europe, we've got Asia, everybody represented here today. Now, in full transparency, I am by no means a cybersecurity expert. And for me, the last couple of days have been very insightful and very informative, from learning about the term homomorphic encryption and the concept of zero trust, to knowing that one day I will hopefully be able to stop worrying about remember my passwords. So a lot of learning for me, but of course for you gentlemen, this is your bread and butter. And but still, I'm curious to know, did you learn anything new in the last couple of days? I know you just arrived, David, so that's a bit unfair to ask you, but Risto and René, did you have any takeaways that you were like, okay, or if not, what really stood out to you?
Well, I sure did, so thank you for the introduction. I think after having spent 15 years in this industry, it still feels to me that many of the things that we set out to do 15 years ago still have to materialize. I'm still disappointed in the lack of collaboration that we have achieved in this industry. That there are still economic powers at work that prevent us, and legal and other powers at work. Because I think philosophically we understand that we have to do these things, but in reality we don't. Nearly as much as we should.
Why? What are the hurdles? I'm sure there's more than one, but if one or two come to mind, what would you say are the biggest challenges that we still haven't overcome?
I think there is fear of unknown. We have to write the rules as we go along, and that is not always trivial. Sometimes we go back to older frameworks that have existed in the past for other types of collaboration or other types of sharing, and they don't work very well in the cyber industry. And so we have to write new rules, and this team, this group of folks will have to write those rules. The other part is, I think there is a philosophy difference with in cyber. I think there is a very negative view of cyber, which is we're always going to be under attack. We're always going to be on the defense. We will lose unless. And I actually think that we have to go to a world where we think about it differently and say we will win unless. And that creates much better energy in a group like this to go build preventative measures and to see cybersecurity as an enabler rather than as something you have to do because you're being told to do it, and then you typically always fail.
Do you mind if I just, because David did a lot of nodding during this answer, so even though you weren't here, is there anything that you feel was really striking you?
So thank you for inviting me here. I apologize, I only just arrived. I was at another conference in Paris, but you know, the idea of being able to come and engage in this conversation was just too great an opportunity. I totally agree with what René said. I wasn't here, so I don't know what the conversations were, but I think the issues really are to change the mindset. I think that we shouldn't see cybersecurity as a big problem, the big bad wolf is out there, etc. But rather we should see cybersecurity as a key enabler. It's an enabler, firstly, for us to reap all the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution. This is something which will allow us to gain the full benefits and it will uplift people from poverty, give them access to markets and information. It's also, from a company's perspective, potential value-added service. It's a potential differentiator, something which you can use to differentiate yourself from your competitors. If you're a bank, for example, or if you're a company producing products and your products are cyber secure, I think there will come a time very soon where the customer will be prepared to pay a premium for this or recognize and say that this is something that they want from the service provider. And I think this will be an opportunity for you to differentiate. One point that I want to make is that the need for collaboration. I fully agree with what René said. The recognition, so I'm head of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. It's the national authority for cybersecurity in Singapore. One of the things that we've done is to run cyber readiness exercises in Singapore for the companies who are providing essential services. So one of the early exercises which we ran about 4 years ago was with the banking and finance sector. Singapore, as you know, is a big banking sector in the world. And we brought in the critical banks and financial institutions. And the sector lead, which is our central bank, was there to help us run this exercise. At the end of the exercise, I met with one of the senior vice presidents whom I knew very well, and I said, hey, how was the exercise? And she said, it was great. So I said, what was the main learning point? And she said that the main learning point was that we recognize that in all other areas, we're competitors. But in the area of cybersecurity, we're in this together, and we're not competing with each other, but the enemy is out there, and we need to work together. So I said, that's brilliant. If this is the one thing that you took away, the exercise and all the effort that went into it was worth it. So this is the message I'd give to the audience here. We're all in this together. We can compete on many fronts, nationally, within the industry, but in cybersecurity, the bad guys are out there. We need to work together.
One of the big challenges that we face is the fact that it's so hard to differentiate which solutions are secure and which are not. And just using another example, we all talk about which operator is the best. So we all typically use one operator for our mobile phones at the time. And the network works well in certain geographies and works not that well in other regions. And then we form an opinion of whether my operator is the best or not. And then if I switch, I won't know what that my former operator is doing to build up their networks. And network is not the same 6 months later. So again, only looking at what kind of a service am I getting at a particular time. The same applies for cybersecurity. If a bank becomes known for good security, I don't really know whether they have good security. I just know that there have been no public incidents. And actually, taking the example of Maersk, you all know about what they went through. I would pick them as my supplier because of what they have gone through. And they have reacted, and they have learned, and they have invested, and they have a real motivation to do better. So in some cases, the most secure financial services provider would be the one that had the biggest incident, if we know that they have taken that into their hearts. And this is only going to increase as we typically talk about IT security. And we should actually start talking much more about operational technology and how secure that is. The elevators, the cars, the airplanes, the machines in the factories, and so forth and so forth. And everything is interlinked. The big challenge is that operational technology is created by companies that are barely digitally native, and they definitely are not cybersecurity native. So they have a very steep learning curve ahead of them to learn to create secure technologies.
Were you referring now to leadership, or because in a way that's what we'd like.
I was talking about hardcore technology
Just
and the R&D people who make those. Then we add the leadership, and that's a bigger problem.
Which is where I was getting to. Yeah. Of course, the theme, as we said earlier, enabling leadership.
There is a leadership element. One of the things that is very different in OT than IT is there is a hope that I heard over the last few days that more and more security will be built in at the source, such that you don't fix it kind of in post-production, right, and to use a movie term. In OT, that becomes an absolute requirement because you can't fix it afterwards. If you try to do that, it's going to fail. So as leadership, we have to go back to industry and say, this is not our problem to fix after you've delivered the goods. You have to bake that in. And we rely on your leadership, right, to make that a critical component of what you deliver to the world. And you can't just relegate it, right, or delegate it, right, to somebody else.
So can I just pick up this point? I want to say a caveat, and that is that we can't expect that we will have a technical solution to cybersecurity. We can't hope that cybersecurity will be fixed one day. I think if we're hoping that technical leadership is going to do that, it's not going to happen. Definitely not in my professional lifetime. I think the key message that I have for leadership is to understand that this is a risk management issue. Cybersecurity is a risk management. It is a business issue. It is not a technical issue. It is not something which you ask the CISO or the CIO to deal with. It is something which you have to manage as a risk management issue. It's a risk management issue because it affects your business, it affects your reputation. It requires trade-offs. There is no such thing as absolute cybersecurity. The only secure computer is the one that's still in the box. The moment you take it out, you start to use it, you're taking on risk. So cybersecurity is always a balance. It's a balance between usability, functionality. It's a balance between security, and it's a balance between cost. This is an iron triangle of usability, security, and cost. So you want to have all of them, but you can't. So someone has to make the trade-offs. The question is, who will make the trade-offs? Because it affects your business, it has to be the C-suite. It has to be the CEO or someone that the CEO trusts. It can't be left to the technical people to make the trade-offs because it affects the business. So I think senior leaders need to understand that you have to take ownership of this. And in order to take ownership of it, you need to understand enough about cybersecurity. You don't need to understand the full technical details about it, but you need to understand enough to make the trade-off decisions, same as with any other risk management issue.
That's exactly where we're going. I mean, how do you help them close that gap, your C-suites and your board members, in order to better understand the technology, in order to be able to manage the risks?
Right.
Well, I have had multiple such discussions, as I'm sort of a rare animal, having spent so much time in cybersecurity and now chairing a large company. And I have tried to make it very pragmatic to the CEO. What I tell the CEO is, first of all, do you know what are the most critical IT systems in your business? Do you know what would happen? Sort of what would be the worst that could happen with or through those IT systems? Typically the CEOs don't know. They might even not be able to list what are the most critical IT systems they have. So find out what's the nightmare scenario. And then hire a red team, attack against those 5 or 3 systems without telling your CIO about it. I know that there are CIOs in the audience and CISOs, and this takes courage for the CEO to do. But there will be some sort of hard ground under his or her feet once this exercise is over, and the whole organization can learn. And then if the red team breaks into those critical systems, then you know that you have work to do. And you know certain low-hanging fruits that you can pick to block access through the ways that the red team came in. And you're already in a better situation. If they can't break in, then you learn something there as well. But at least for my company, we still have to encounter the first red teaming exercise where we were not able to break in. Yes. So typically it always happens. And that will provide a burning feeling in the CEO's tummy. Mm-hmm. He and she will be much more interested in learning about this. There will be motivation for the whole organization, and you'll be talking about some real facts. And then, of course, you go into a process of measuring what your IT security or OT security is, and then taking steps to improve it. And it becomes a measurable process.
One thing that I want to add, because I think it's really good for them to understand the board and the management team, what those liabilities are. It's also for them to understand what they are liable for. Because it's not the CISO that is liable. That he will lose or she will lose her job, but that's not the liability, right, for the company or for the individuals. And similarly, what is their role once there is an incident? Their personal role as directors, as officers of a company. Something we did at the time of our IPO in 2012 is sit down with the NYSE to begin with and other stock exchanges and say, well, what would that legal and communication framework look like? Right? And can we put that on paper? And can we educate the 2,500 companies that are listed on the NYSE, their directors and their executive officers, can we educate them on the legal framework, on the communication frameworks, on the crisis management frameworks? And those words have come back a lot during the last 2 days as well. How do you communicate a crisis? And what is the role of management and leadership in that? And so I think there is a role for us as leaders here as well, is to work with those types of authorities to build an education framework for that part of the industry where leadership needs to first and foremost even understand what their responsibilities are in all of this. Because what we found is that, first of all, unlike executives being certified by, for example, stock exchanges on compliance, right, nobody got certified on cybersecurity. Well, I found an interesting statistics, which is that 99% or more of all companies ever breached were compliant. Right? So guess what? Right? Being compliant doesn't help you in one way or the other, right? Being resilient at all. It just means you're compliant. It does nothing for your resilience.
So let me add 2 points to this discussion. One of them I would build on Risto's earlier point, and that is you need to understand that cybersecurity is not rocket science. It's just like any other threat which your company faces. So in the physical security arena, the world of physical security, we understand the state provides one level of security. So you have the police, you have the border guards, and this provides the base level of security. Individual companies still have to decide on the level of security, physical security that they need for themselves. It can be as simple as having locks on the doors of your facility, or you may want to have a fence, or depending on the nature of your work, you may decide that you need security guards. Now, in the physical arena, you don't protect everything at the same level. There are certain parts which are more sensitive, which will require a higher level of physical security. You may have restricted access, you will check for who is authorized, you will have people to accompany them. The same has to be done for cybersecurity. In order to do this, you need to know what are your crown jewels, what is important to your company. It could be your databases, it could be the customer records, or it could be personal data which you are keeping. You need to know, like what Risto says, which are the key IT systems that you have, and you need to protect them. And the level of protection is not uniform across the company. So it's just understanding this and applying the same kinds of processes and mindsets that we have in the physical world and applying it in the cyber world. The second point that I'll make is that for boards and C-suites to ask the question, how much are we spending on cybersecurity? And I would say that a good number of companies don't know how much they are spending on cybersecurity. And the next question is to ask yourself, how much are our competitors spending on cybersecurity? So as a rule of thumb, how much should one spend on cybersecurity? About 8 to 12% of their IT budget. So not against your top line or bottom line, but against perhaps your IT budget. So if you're spending X amount of your IT budget, I would say 8 to 12% on cybersecurity. And the next question is, how much are your competitors spending on cybersecurity? If you are spending a lot less, then either your CISO is excellent and he's broken the code, or perhaps you're underinvested in cybersecurity.
How to incentivize companies to do this? What do you recommend?
I think a lot of us see cybersecurity as a cost. So it costs us so much to implement cybersecurity. But I would suggest that we also look at it from the other perspective. What will the cost of a major cyber breach be for your company? So the example of Maersk, for example, direct costs are in the order of $300 million. So is your company prepared to so cybersecurity in some respects can be seen like insurance. You're paying this, investing this, so that you would prevent a bigger catastrophe in the event of a hack, and that the costs associated with that, the disruption. Also bear in mind your company's reputation.
And maybe even people's lives.
Yes, especially
nowadays we
OT.
think about the most important asset being databases and customer information and so forth. But increasingly it will be the ability to start engines, open locks, switch valves, reshuffle the real world. And if the wrong people get access to that ability, then people's lives might be at stake.
There is an interesting incentive. Salesforce.com started this a long time ago by saying, you know what, we'll just turn this inside out. We'll show you, we'll demonstrate to you on a daily basis, a real-time basis, how trustworthy we are, how good we are at this. And I think as leadership, we have an opportunity here to continue that train of thought and say, we are going to be fully transparent, right, with our consumers and with our citizens about how good we are at this. And we will hold ourselves up to the highest standards out there. And then people have to follow, to the point that was made earlier, right? Benchmarking and making cybersecurity a virtue of what you do, right? And elevate that to trust, right? To elevate it to the point where you can trust your interactions with me, your government, your vendor, your supplier, your energy company, but expose it. Right? Because most companies today, most governments today are still black holes when it comes to the trust that we want our consumers and citizens to have in our systems. And that would show true leadership, I think.
Trust is absolutely an issue in cybersecurity, public or private sector, which brings me to how can these two worlds work together better? And how can the private sector perhaps support the public sector a bit more? Anybody?
So I'll give you one example. A long time ago, I personally made a decision at Palo Alto Networks that, for example, anything and everything we know about threats shouldn't be monetized. We want to put that in the public domain and make that available to anybody who wants to consume that. I find that very important. Similarly, any and all materials to educate operators and developers and anybody else to become smarter at cybersecurity should be in the public domain. It shouldn't be monetized. But could we have made lots of money? I'm sure we could, but we didn't. We didn't monetize our threat intelligence. We didn't monetize our education. We made that available to society to consume. And that came not only with materials, but even with a donation, right, to those institutions around the world. And in fact, we started much of that in Singapore, as it turned out, right, to make sure. And by the way, we didn't give it to the privileged, right, not to the Stanfords of the world, with all due respect to Stanford. We gave it to the non-privileged, right, the folks that couldn't afford this and that weren't in the best schools. That's how I think we can, as industry, help promote a more secure world.
And as I said last night, this is really what I love about this industry, that the people behind the scenes, they work with each other, they partner, they share information. What you said has been the tradition for the last 30 years in this industry. Then to balance that, our marketing departments don't align with that code. And let's just take the machine learning discussions over the last few years.
Yes.
I mean, it has been so much full of hot air that it's just
you
crazy.
really think so?
Absolutely. And if you really understand what we do with machine learning, you understand the complexity and the challenge and how little we actually achieve with that. And I'm not sort of saying that my company would be poor in that. I'm just saying that the whole industry has ways to go in that. And just as an example, the Mitre evaluation, and Forrester has built a script that turns those measurements into rankings. F-Secure's solution came on top in the last ranking, and my technical team said that we cannot talk about that. We should not tell anybody. We cannot use it because it's not the whole truth. And I really respect that point of view. They really think about the real technology and the real threats and the customers, and the fact that marketing often confuses things. But then we still need to be able to communicate what's good in our solutions and help the customers to pick the best ones. So this community here is largely a technical one. And I think we somehow need to just keep each other honest.
But it comes back to what do we as a community ask the industry about how to behave. Right? If we are fine with them telling us stories about machine learning, then of course the industry will continue that tradition. But what if we say, well, if you innovate anything, for example, algorithms in machine learning, you should make those algorithms available for the common good. And I was on stage 2 weeks ago in The Hague at an EU conference on cyber, and I actually said, I will promise to make those algorithms available because I do believe that it helps everybody to be better. Now, how you implement those algorithms is up to you and everybody else, but I think we should do more of that and not try to keep it to ourselves. Right? So whether that is threat intelligence or algorithms or models, I think we should, as an industry, grow up, make that available, and then for anybody to consume and to use.
So I'll add, from the government's perspective, we recognize that no one government, no one agency can deal with cybersecurity by itself. Cybersecurity is a team sport, and we have to work together. You have to have governments, industry, academia, civil society working on this. And why is this so? Besides the reasons that have been explained, I would say that there's another aspect of cyber, which several aspects of cyber which make this imperative essential. I come from the military background. So in the physical world, in the kinetic world, states have a monopoly on the use of force. In cyber, this is not the case. So you find that there are a lot of non-state actors who are not governed, by the traditional rules of armed conflict who are now operating in this space. Companies are not able most companies will not be able to deal with these kinds of non-state actors with that level of sophistication and wherewithal. So we have to work together. So there are some aspects of cyber where states, the government has to come in because of either market failure or because of the level of the threat. Governments have a responsibility to then provide that base layer of security and facilitate information sharing. In Singapore, last year, about a year and a half ago, we passed the Cybersecurity Act. It's the first omnibus act that we have for cybersecurity in Singapore, which identifies the critical infrastructure owners, the companies which are providing essential services to Singapore and to Singaporeans. We place an obligation on them to have a certain level of cybersecurity and to report any cybersecurity incidents to the government so that we can then investigate, but more importantly, that we can share information with the other members of the critical infrastructure ecosystem. Companies are not always incentivized to report an incident. You're a listed company, you think that it'll impact your share price, you have a reputation. But we see that if you attack a bank today, you may be attacking another bank tomorrow, or you may attack the power station the day after tomorrow. So we have a duty of care to report this so that we can share that information to other people who might be a victim. And this is borderless. So when we share the information, we don't just restrict it to Singapore, we share it with our partners as well. So we have to change that incentive to facilitate information sharing. Information sharing is not public, but it's behind technical closed doors so that we can facilitate the preparedness of the people against potential cyber attack.
Okay, and as we wrap it up, and we think of some of the other key imperatives, as you mentioned, that we see emerging in order for corporations, organizations, partnerships to secure this trustworthy fourth industrial revolution. I ask a panel of men, is empowering women in cybersecurity one of them?
A big yes.
Yes.
A big yes.
Tell me why.
As an example.
I just want to hear it. Why?
Oh, so as an example, this year we will have in the US educated more than 3 million girls on cybersecurity in collaboration with Girl Scouts.
300 million?
3 million.
Oh, okay. I thought you said
There's no
300. I was
3
like,
million girls.
I was like, the whole population of the US, exactly.
3 million girls,
Okay, all right.
right, who
I'll take 3 million.
Who have received a cybersecurity badge of sorts. There's 12. And that program is now being implemented around the world in organized troops, as we call them, as an example of where you put your leadership. Because you can try to fix it with 60-year-old men who sit on boards, and you have to do that too, right? But you can also start with 6-year-old girls and do it that way. And so we've gone all the way down to that level, and we only do it for girls, not for boys.
Currently, there's an advantage for all female people in cybersecurity. At least F-Secure will hire any female that we can find that is truly interested in cybersecurity, just because we feel that the teams work better if there's both male and female in the teams. And we currently have 26% of our employees female, and we really struggle getting higher. And it's not because of the companies, it's not because of the industry, it's because of girls not being interested in engineering, in maths, in studying science. And of course, we all have an obligation to try to do something about that as well. I had an exciting opportunity to give a 90-minute training on machine learning programming to 11-year-old girls. I had 200 of them in the audience. And that I would have never been so nervous before a presentation. I was really scared. I thought that they will just start playing games with their mobile phones after 15 minutes. But it actually went really well. And the teachers who were behind the girls in the back of the room, they said that actually they have rarely seen these girls not look at their mobile phones when listening to a technical presentation.
So the interest is there. It's just how it's delivered, perhaps.
You have to find ways to make it live for these girls and boys.
So I fully agree. I think we have to do more to bring the females into cybersecurity. I'm happy to take credit that I sent Gwenda to represent CSA. Gwenda,
Gwenda?
please
Where
stand
are
up.
you?
Yeah, right. So she spoke to you all. So in a stroke of brilliance, I sent a female director to address this audience in anticipation of such questions. No, the reality is that there is an overall shortage of people, qualified people.
But that's it. It's not just the women, to be fair. It's also qualified people in cybersecurity.
But the reality is that we don't have enough. So there's a huge potential reservoir of talent from the female gender. So the challenge is that we are not getting enough coming out of the universities. So I agree, we are moving upstream, trying to have women in cyber programs. We've just had one 2 months ago in Singapore, and ladies in cyber, so that you raise the awareness that cyber is a potential career option for young ladies, and then show them that this is something which they can do, but they also need role models. So this is the challenge. So that's why we have Gwenda here. And show that you can have a successful career here, and women can do well in engineering and in cybersecurity. And then hopefully we generate and overcome some of these, I think, inherent or built-in biases that we might have. There is no reason in my mind why ladies can't do well in cyber.
And actually, they might do better than men. Often girls are more mature in their desire to contribute to society. They are more purpose-driven than boys of the same age. Boys might be more after career, prestige, money. And cybersecurity is a way to really do something good. And it gives you a purpose. And that's why I do believe that we can push against the envelope here and make more girls interested in cybersecurity.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, for your daughters or your wives or your girlfriends, and ladies, Singapore is a place to be. Hit up Risto for a job. And if you have any Girl Scouts, Palo Alto is doing the work over there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the panel today and for your amazing insights. It was a real pleasure. And now, as promised, Professor.
Thank you. It was a great panel to summarize and to bring up again, let's say, the key points of the discussions during the last 36 hours. Hilde, my wife, and I have created a foundation 20 years ago for social entrepreneurship. And when I listened to the panel, I felt those people like you here and those who are really engaged in cybersecurity in some way are social entrepreneurs, because they are the engineers of our society for tomorrow. So thank you very much, and thank you, Alois, and I'm very proud of the team we have assembled in the last 2 years. And a particular thanks to you, Truls Oerting, who was actually the pioneer when we started this whole exercise. He took the lead and created the beginning. You planted this tree, if I may say so. When we came together the first 2 years ago, and when I walk in the corridors and so on and talk to a number of you, I try to measure the temperature. And 2 years ago, there was quite some question mark. I think it was a community of interested. Let's see, we are interested to see what the forum is doing. And it didn't come naturally to your minds that the forum should be engaged in cybersecurity. Now, last year, I think we have moved from a community of interest much more to a community of purpose. We felt we have a common purpose, we have a common objective, And this time, I think it's a community of shared destiny. I think we all have a common responsibility, whatever, whether we are from the public sector or from the private sector, to work together in order to secure the bloodstream we depend on. And you mentioned we should integrate cybersecurity into what we are doing, not consider it as a special, consider it as a special dimension. I was thinking when we had a lot of discussions when we looked at the theme of the next annual meeting in Davos. And finally, we, after many reflections, because it has to be short, it shouldn't be trivial, there should be a message in it, and so on, we decided that the theme should be stakeholders for a cohesive and sustainable world. For a cohesive and sustainable world. Now let me go back to the word stakeholder. The forum was created 50 years ago as a platform to bring stakeholders together, governments, business, and civil society. So here we are all stakeholders. And the cyber dimension, I think, is reflected in this word cohesive world. Because if we want to have a non-conflictual world, if we want to have a cohesive world, we have to eliminate the risks which are incurred in our cyber activities. Now, we will, the team and I, and together with you and with the advisory board, we will look at the next steps. But let's not forget, this is not just a conference in the traditional sense. It's part of a workflow. I think even in 5 years, we will not be in a situation where we just tick off cybersecurity issue of the past. Now let's move to something which is new. I think it's a constant process. And the forum is putting what you are doing into an ecosystem. So the next step will be our annual meeting in Davos, and it has been mentioned by the panel and in the sessions that what you and what we have done here should be very much elevated to the C-suite. And we have to integrate the C-suite much more into those challenges which you discussed. But then I think there's also a regional issue. Mr. Gore, we discussed in the discussion before, you mentioned the importance of regional cooperation, and we will use our regional meetings, for example, our ASEAN meeting next year, to integrate really the issue of cybersecurity. But then we have also our industry platforms. We have 10 industry platforms, the future of health, the future of mobility, future of energy, and so on. We have already, as you know, experimented, or we had the first approach with electricity. We will now take this experience and make cybersecurity a strong part of each of those industry platforms. And finally with our Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, you know, the forum actually coined this notion of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And we have established a network of centers. By the end of next year, we will have 20 centers. Until now, we have centers in the US, in China, Japan, Israel, and so on, India. And those centers are a network of expertise exchange, working together with the national communities, public sector, private sector, and particularly also universities, working together with the national communities to define, let's say, new technologies and the application of new technologies. Machine learning was mentioned, IoT, and I think one special emphasis of the work of the center is to build in cybersecurity from the beginning on. So there's a strong interrelationship. So you see what you are doing is just, let's say, one step, and we have to climb still many steps together. And I count on you. I have to thank you because as I mentioned, when I'm walking around, I see the atmosphere and I see where the people are engaged and really ready to contribute. I think you have been great contributors. So thank you very much and looking forward to seeing you all at least next autumn again here, but hopefully also integrated into the different other activities which I just mentioned. So have a good trip back, and how shall I say, no cybersecurity incident in the next 12 months.